In the towering glass canyons of Wall Street, where power suits and spreadsheets define success, few names have ever challenged the system the way Cathie Wood did. But long before she became known as the Queen of Innovation, she was simply a quiet, determined woman with an unusual belief that faith and data could coexist, and that technology would one day reshape the world faster than anyone imagined. Cathie grew up in Los Angeles in a conservative Irish Catholic family. Her father was a radar engineer who had worked on advanced military systems, and from him, she learned two things: precision and curiosity. Her mother, a devout believer, taught her discipline and the conviction that no matter how loud the world becomes, one's inner voice must always be louder. That combination, logic and faith, would come to define her life. In the late 1970s, Wall Street was an old boys' club. Few women ever made it past the receptionist's desk, let alone the trading floor. But Cathie, armed with an economics degree from USC and a stubborn belief that she belonged there, took her first job as an assistant economist at Capital Group. She worked silently, tirelessly, analyzing data late into the night. When others left for drinks, she stayed behind to check the numbers again, because she wanted to understand why the numbers moved. It wasn't long before she began asking questions no one else dared to. Why did analysts always assume that technology companies were too risky? Why did everyone treat disruption as a threat rather than the natural next step of evolution? To most of Wall Street, the future was something to be feared. To Cathie Wood, it was something to be owned. In the 1980s and 92nd, as computers began transforming finance, Cathie's vision sharpened. She joined Jennison Associates, where she managed thematic portfolios investing in companies that she believed represented the next era of human progress. She wasn't interested in balance sheets alone. She wanted stories, innovators who dreamed big enough to change history. By the early 2000s, she had built a reputation for being unconventional. She didn't just study markets. She studied patterns, social trends, technological curves, and human behavior. When the dot-com bubble burst, most investors swore off tech forever. Cathie did the opposite. She quietly began building models to identify long-term exponential growth, not by looking at quarterly profits, but by understanding how innovation compounds. Her ideas didn't fit the system, and neither did she. Years later, at AllianceBernstein, she managed billions in global thematic portfolios. It should have been the highlight of her career, yet it became the place where her belief in innovation met its greatest test. Inside the firm's glass boardrooms, surrounded by seasoned managers, Cathie made a bold proposal. She wanted to invest in Tesla, a company that, at the time, was bleeding cash and mocked by nearly every Wall Street analyst. Her colleagues laughed. Some called it reckless, others said she'd lost her mind, but Cathie didn't flinch. She saw something others couldn't: not just a car company, but a technological revolution. Energy storage, autonomous driving, artificial intelligence, and software integration, all in one vision. To her, Tesla wasn't a stock, it was the future. When she pitched the idea in a meeting, an executive interrupted her mid-sentence. "Cathie, we manage money for serious investors, not science fiction." The room laughed. Cathie didn't. She closed her notebook quietly and said one sentence that would later echo across her career: "Innovation always looks like fiction before it becomes fact." After that day, she realized something. If she wanted to invest in the future, she would have to build her own ARK. That night, she went home and prayed not for success, but for clarity. She felt torn between two worlds, one of tradition and stability, and one of radical faith in human progress. And in that silence, she made her decision. If no one believed in innovation the way she did, she would create a place where innovation could live, breathe, and grow freely. A place called ARK. The next morning, Cathie Wood typed her resignation letter. She was in her early 50s, with no investors, no team, and no safety net. Most people would have seen that as the end of a career. For Cathie Wood, it was only the beginning of a revolution. When Cathie Wood left AllianceBernstein in 2013, she didn't just walk away from a job. She walked away from security, prestige, and everything the financial world told her was success. What she carried instead was an idea fragile, defiant, and luminous. She wanted to build an investment firm dedicated entirely to innovation. No value traps, no dividend plays, no backward-looking metrics. Only the future. Her friends called it madness. Her mentors warned her that nobody would invest in such a thing. But Cathie believed that innovation wasn't just a market sector, it was the oxygen of progress. And so, she began to build her ARK. She named it ARK Invest, inspired by the Ark of the Covenant, a vessel that carried faith through chaos. Her vision was simple, yet radical. An open, transparent fund where research was shared freely online, and every investor from Wall Street veteran to college student could see exactly what she believed in. That idea alone was heresy on Wall Street. Most fund managers build empires of secrecy. Cathie built a temple of openness. She invited her analysts to post their research on Twitter, encouraged debate, and published every trade daily. When people asked why, she smiled. Truth should not fear transparency. To her, markets were not just about numbers. They were conversations about faith, data, and human destiny. But faith alone couldn't pay the bills. In the beginning, ARK struggled to survive. Most institutional investors refused to fund her. They called her too thematic, too risky, too visionary. In early 2021, as her funds reached record highs, a CNBC anchor asked her, "Cathie, do you think this kind of performance can continue?" She smiled softly and said, "Innovation is unstoppable. It's only just beginning." The clip went viral. Her confidence became legend. But it also marked the peak, the exact top of the euphoria. By mid-2021, signs of strain began to appear. Interest rates edged higher, inflation returned, and as Wall Street rotated out of growth stocks, ARK's once unshakable portfolio began to tremble. First, a few tech names dipped, then the dominoes fell faster. By late 2021, ARK's stunning rise began to reverse the numbers that once defined her triumph now reflected pain. But the public hadn't noticed yet. They were still watching the interviews, quoting her lines, celebrating her courage. For many, Cathie Wood was no longer just an investor. She was the symbol of the modern market itself, and when symbols rise to high, gravity always finds a way to bring them back due. In private, Cathie prayed again, as she always had when faced with storms. She reminded herself of the promise she'd made years ago when she founded ARK. Faith is not about predicting the future. It's about trusting the vision when the future turns against you. What she didn't yet know was that the storm she had been preparing for all her life was already on its way. In early 2022, the winds changed. After 2 years of euphoria, the market's rhythm shifted. Interest rates began to rise. Inflation surged, and the same tech names that had soared under a decade of easy money started to collapse under their own weight. For most investors, it was a correction. For Cathie Wood, it was an earthquake. Her beloved innovation stocks, Tesla, Roku, Zoom, Coinbase, Teladoc, all began to plunge, one after another. The very companies that had once made her a legend were now dragging her empire into chaos. Within months, her flagship fund, ARK Innovation ETF, lost more than half its value. Billions of dollars vanished. The same headlines that once crowned her the queen of innovation now called her the fallen prophet. On CNBC, analysts debated her collapse like a public autopsy. "She's reckless. Her models don't work anymore. It was all luck." Social media turned brutal. Memes mocked her, investors cursed her, and critics celebrated her downfall as proof that the age of disruption had been nothing but a dream. And yet through all of it, she didn't run. She didn't hide. Cathie Wood kept going on air, kept publishing her trades, kept repeating the same message. We are in a moment of fear. But innovation doesn't stop because the market is scared. Behind closed doors, the toll was real. Her team, young, passionate analysts, now faced exhaustion and self-doubt. Every morning, they opened their screens to a sea of red. ARK's office, once filled with laughter and optimism, turned quiet. No one wanted to say it out loud, but everyone felt it. The pressure, the fatigue, the fear of letting her down. Cathie often stayed long after everyone left. She'd walk to the glass window overlooking Manhattan, lights flickering across the skyline, and whisper the same prayer she had since the beginning. Let the truth reveal itself in time. For her, every crash was a test not of skill, but of conviction. Then came the breaking point. In May 2022, as the Nasdaq plunged into bear territory, ARK's losses exceeded 70%. For the first time, even her most loyal followers began to question her. Retail investors who once called her Saint Cathie now flooded social media with anger. Some said she had betrayed their trust, others accused her of delusion, and yet, in her interviews, Cathie remained calm, even radiant. We are early. The world doesn't yet see what we see. Innovation takes time to be rewarded. It was faith pure and stubborn, but to many, it sounded like denial. In June, an interviewer asked her point blank, "Cathie, do you ever question your own conviction?" She paused, smiled faintly, and said, "Every day." But conviction isn't about never doubting. It's about believing through doubt. Her words hung in the air, poetic, haunting, and painfully human. By late 2022, the numbers were devastating. ARK's assets, once above $60 billion, had shrunk to under $10 billion. Funds that once soared 150% were now down 75%. For any other manager, this would have been the end. But Cathie refused to close a single fund. She kept posting research, kept appearing publicly, kept insisting that innovation's time would come again. People forget, she told Bloomberg, we are investing in companies that are changing the world not next quarter, but for the next decade. And as months turned into years, something remarkable began to happen. Even as losses mounted, new investors still came. They weren't chasing performance. They were drawn by something else, her unshakable belief. To them, Cathie wasn't just a fund manager, she was a symbol of resilience, someone who stood her ground when everyone else fled. They saw her as a mirror of innovation itself, fragile, misunderstood, and destined to fall before rising again. In private moments, she admitted to friends that the pressure was unbearable. But she never blamed anyone, not the markets, not the media. She only said, quietly, I was called to do this. And callings are not about comfort, they're about purpose. As the market cycles turned once more, Cathie Wood remained where she had always been, at the intersection of faith and foresight. She never claimed to predict the market. What she pursued was something far deeper, a belief that innovation was the purest expression of human creativity. To her, investing wasn't about speculation. It was about participation in the story of progress. When journalists asked how she endured the volatility, she often replied with quiet certainty, "Volatility is not risk. Risk is not understanding what you own." To most on Wall Street, those were just words. But for Cathie, they were philosophy, the foundation of how she built ARK and how she faced every storm. She would start each day the same way, an early morning prayer, followed by a deep dive into new research, artificial intelligence breakthroughs, gene editing discoveries, energy storage efficiencies. Every chart, every paper, every data point was a glimpse of the future she believed in. Even after the hardest years, when funds lost more than half their value and critics called her delusional, she never lost that spark. Her conviction wasn't arrogance, it was faith dressed as courage. In an age when algorithms trade faster than thought and attention spans vanish in seconds, Cathie stood as something rare, a human visionary in a digital storm. And while the world debated whether she was a genius or a gambler, Cathie herself remained unmoved. She once said in an interview, "History will decide whether I was early or wrong, but I'd rather be early than afraid." It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about legacy, about inspiring a generation of investors to believe that innovation could be moral, purposeful, and transformative. Her influence spread beyond Wall Street. Young analysts, engineers, and entrepreneurs began to see investing as a form of belief. Belief in the power of science, in human potential, in progress. Cathie Wood had shown them that courage and conviction could coexist with compassion and grace. She never built skyscrapers, nor founded banks. She built trust, the kind that cannot be measured on a balance sheet. Even now, as she looks ahead to the next decade, to artificial intelligence reshaping economies, to genomics rewriting life itself, to blockchain redefining value, she continues to ask the same simple question: where is the world going, and how can we invest in making it better? That, perhaps, is her greatest legacy. On Wall Street, where fear and greed are often the loudest voices, Cathie Wood reminds us that faith in innovation, in progress, in people, can be the quiet force that moves mountains. And when the next great wave of disruption arrives, and the world once again hesitates at the edge of the unknown, someone will remember her words. Don't run from the future, run toward it. Cathie Wood, the woman who dared to believe that investing could change the world.